Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you are excited for our fall virtual conference as much as I am. October 18th to 20th. Mark it on your calendars. It's presented by Beer 30, by the Fifth Ingredient, Pneumatic Scale Angeles, and Pro Brew Supply. Thanks to them for helping keep our content 100% free and accessible to all. It's going to be 3 straight days of 50+ sessions. And today we have 3 of our presenters with us today. Without further ado, Kyle, you are to the right of me. Let everybody know a little bit about who you are and what you do in the industry.
So my name is Kyle. I'm based out of Toronto, Ontario, and I do a little bit of equipment design and sourcing, and I do a little bit of consulting for breweries. I've been working in the industry for nearly a decade now, and I more or less help people on a technical nature, not just the culture nature.
And Kyle, you and I have had conversations for quite some time now, and I honestly don't remember why we first started having weekly conversations. I guess, you were really active in CBP, always trying
Julie
to...
Rhodes.
Yeah, I think Julie might have connected us. Julie is a very good connector.
Yeah. And we basically just started chatting on how to make the group a little bit better.
Absolutely. Appreciate those conversations, and I swear I'll be back on schedule with our Monday weeklies next week.
Okay.
It was great to see you last week, and it's great to see you again. Can you tell everybody a little bit about what you do and what startedbrewery.com is?
Of course. My path in the beer world has definitely meandered. I started in the distribution world, so I started on the middle tier. My brother owned a distribution company at that time, so that was my foray into learning all things distribution, which then branched into the Big Beers, Belgians, and Barley Wines Festival and events, and then morphed into customized craft beer programs, which was initially a destination resort direction where I consulted for destination resorts and the sales and marketing people and the food and beverage directors to create craft beer programs and work with their team and their staff, and has since then launched into further workshops and events. And the most recent iteration of Beer World is startedbrewery.com, which I just started. It's a pandemic mission. My friend Candace Moon in San Diego, the craft beer attorney, received an email saying, "Hey, it looks like you might be interested in this internet URL." And she said, "Well, we've done all of these presentations and seminars and webinars, and we answer the same questions all the time about starting breweries. Why would we not do this?" And I had the bandwidth, because Big Beers is again postponed, to make that come to life. So that's been the latest mission, and it's really been a fun thing, especially a pandemic thing, to pull together our peers for a common cause, to kind of lift up the industry and provide some resources. So that's the meandering version.
And it's interesting to think about, because so many breweries have been just dealing with some of these challenges and struggles to just survive the pandemic. But a lot of us who work on outside of the breweries, providing some sort of value to the industry, we've dedicated a lot of our time and energy to projects like that. I think it's fantastic you've done something like that through the past year and a half.
It's been really interesting also to speak to what fundamentally stays the same, those core truths and those core principles, and what things we've really had to pivot and reinvent. E-commerce is one, especially given my beginning in distribution, that is just insane. It blows my mind. And then there are some things like customer service and personal interaction that remain incredibly critical. So it's an interesting discussion to have on all levels.
That's so funny you mentioned all that, because I led a panel at CBC last Sunday or the Sunday before, and one of the common themes was, what changed the same, what's different, and how do you prepare everyone involved for the new expectations? And I feel like it's exactly what you just said.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you.
Yeah. Colleen, hello, and great to see you as always. So I know you're on a massive road trip right now. So where in the world are you, and what do you do?
I am in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm enjoying my time here. So I won't let anyone start coming at Omaha for being a flyover state. It's been a fun couple of days so far. But I launched Second Sip Beverage Consulting back in April with my brother, really geared towards helping, craft beverage creators, specifically breweries. I don't know if the echo's on my side. Give me 1 second. Better now? Awesome. So launched Second Sip Beverage Consulting back in April. Hold on, I'll try this one more time. Another try?
We'll just keep going through it. It's fine.
Awesome. Well, bear with me, guys. Yeah, launched Second Sip back in April, aimed to help, craft beverage creators really achieve their dreams and goals in this dynamic industry. And I did that after about 6 years working at Craft Brew Alliance, portfolio of 8 breweries around the U.S., anchored by Kona, the largest in the portfolio. And there I did, strategy, analytics, mergers and acquisitions. I had the exciting thrill of acquiring 3 breweries on the same day, which was probably the most tiring experience in my entire life. And then no good deed goes unpunished. So they shipped me out east to run those breweries and CBA's entire East Coast business unit, which helped get me out of the strategy cerebral world and really into the operational side of things of running the breweries day in, day out, and working with a really awesome team across sales, marketing, tap rooms, operations, you name it. So that was really fun. And then naturally we got scooped up by Big Brother Anheuser-Busch. So stayed around for a little bit of that integration process, about 6 months post integration, and then just realized, I was missing working with smaller breweries and kind of crafting their own destiny a little bit more. So that's what triggered me and Brian to launch Second Sip, and it's given me the opportunity now to start traveling again around the country and meeting up with a ton of awesome breweries and founders, and trying a lot of good beer out there.
So for all your travels right now, what is your goal through interacting with all these breweries? Is it more so just a fun road trip to, stop everywhere you want, or is the goal to drum up a little business?
A little bit of both. It's always good to mix business with pleasure in this industry. I was certainly feeling absurdly cooped up and stir crazy after the 1.5 years of COVID. So I knew personally I needed to get back out on the road just for my own personal sanity, but kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone, because I've been able to have a lot of good conversations with breweries that have turned into potential clients, future clients, current clients. So all good there too.
And you're making this massive road trip, I imagine, a business expense as well. So that's probably pretty nice.
Yeah, that's what the accountants tell me to do.
So out of all the unique places you stopped along the route, what's one city or place that surprised you?
I would say Omaha for sure. I didn't have that high of an expectation. For me, Omaha was like, which path am I going to take from Chicago over to Denver? But I've been pleasantly surprised with the beer scene here, and especially the number of brewery distillery combos, which are, I know popping up a lot more across the U.S., but certainly seem like they're a big trend here, which, I think with the cross-category consumption that's just increasing for consumers, it's a good model for breweries to consider.
And you've talked so much about diversification, so I'm sure you're going to have a great time there.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, Laura, you just got back from the Craft Brewers Conference, and you and I actually, got to see each other briefly at your awesome starterbrewery.com event at Beer Stout Lager House. Tell me a little bit about your CBC experience this year.
Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, and we postponed this discussion till now, I think that the biggest revelation that I personally had was how exhausting interpersonal engagement and interaction can be when you haven't really done that for a couple of years now. And I think that it's so exciting, and it's good for the soul, and it's good for all sorts of amazing things. But when you're putting out that energy and receiving that energy and navigating everything that's kind of coming your way, plus that kind of low level of anxiety that goes with not being sure if you're safe enough, if you're doing a good enough job, I think that all played into it as well. I felt like I needed to be there because Startup Brewery is brand new, and I wanted to connect with additional potential contributors and potential advertisers, and really reconnect with some of my big beer sponsors as well. That's one of the reasons that CBC and GABF are so important to me, because I want to make sure that everybody understands how much we support and appreciate them. So kind of a double barrel mission for me. And even though I was feeling a little uncomfortable, I felt like I needed to be there. But it was really fantastic to be in person. I was surprisingly comfortable in the convention center. and I didn't know if I would be. So yeah, and choosing Bierstadt for our event with wide open garage doors to the outside, I think was something that was important to us as well.
And that was quite a busy event. Did you find you became more relaxed over time just being around people again?
Some, but it was very, very dependent on who it was and where I was. I found the space in the convention center to be helpful. Bierstadt and our event was way early in the week for me. It was our first real event. We had dinner the night before. But that was a pretty high anxiety level, in part because it was a successful event and bringing together the people that were there. And I think maybe a quarter, 30% of people were choosing masks, but because the doors were wide open, not as many did. And so you want to believe that you're outside and you're safe. It's just kind of one of those weird things, but the connection within our industry is just so important. It's really about people.
Absolutely. And I'm glad, I imagine you're glad to leave CBC and not test positive for anything. So
when Tuesday came, I was really excited.
I took 2 negative tests before coming home, and it gives me a little more faith in the world. So, I'm excited that we came away healthy.
Me too. And I really hope that we can successfully gather going forward, regardless of what happens with all this. And I think it's really just learning how to approach that in a safe way and how to feel like we can be successful.
Absolutely. Now, Colleen and Laura and Kyle, you both are in fascinating beer cities right now. For the longest time, both like Ohio and North Carolina, the growth in those 2 markets has just blown my mind. And Colleen, I'll start with you. Why do you think North Carolina is doing so well in craft beer right now?
I mean, I think North Carolina as a state in any industry is doing well. There's a lot of growth coming to the state, other industries coming to the state. So population growth and young population growth is there. So I think that makes it a ripe spot for breweries to thrive. And then I think, anchored by Asheville, it was always a little bit of the craft beer capital of the East, or that's what it claimed to be. And I think the other cities around the state just started feeling a little bit jealous and said, hey, people don't always have to drive up to the mountains to get good beer. And so I think you saw it really explode in the population centers. Charlotte especially is, in some ways maybe a little oversaturated with breweries, but it's good for a consumer perspective with the choices that they have. That's for sure.
I can't wait to actually visit Charlotte. Before the pandemic, it was one of my go-to cities I needed to go to, and I have not yet visited. So I look forward to that day. Now, Laura, I know you call almost 2 states home. You're in Colorado a bit, but you're also in Ohio right now. What are some observations that you've seen about the Ohio craft beer scene?
It's interesting after being in Colorado for so long and having it be so, I guess, mature in the industry. It's interesting, Great Lakes has been here forever, and forever was relative compared to the other breweries. So it's interesting to see what kinds of breweries, what kinds of entrepreneurs, whether they're following the multi, beer and mead and cider and whatever other beverages all at the same time, if they're sticking exclusively to beer. I've seen both. I see more, though, to Colleen's point about distilleries and breweries happening. I see more of that happening in Colorado than I see here, but nearly everybody's jumping on the seltzer wagon. So that's true here as well. I think one of the more interesting things I've seen here in the Cleveland area is the difference in kind of that collaborative piece, that the rising tide floats all boats. And in some cases, in this case, when you get further away from the city, there's more collaboration and more neighborliness and more of what I generally conceive as the craft beer way, the smaller brewery way, the way that we have always kind of felt as an industry, that brewers cooperate and get along. But in the city, and some of the first breweries that I was introduced to are not as collaborative, and there's more of a competitive feeling, more of a you're stealing my employees or my employee left to compete with me feeling. And that was a little foreign to me, and I was surprised to see that. So I'll be curious to see if that changes as they have a phenomenal state guild, does a really good job of being active and pulling in kind of all of the little breweries that are all the way around the state and in little tiny places that are barely on the map. So maybe that will be enough to kind of change that culture a little bit and get away from the competitive piece and just the rising tide piece. But that's been interesting to watch. And I'll be here during Big Beers again this year. And we're talking about one of my friends lives on the east side and is talking about wanting to do an event over there. So it'll be, really interesting. I'm also helping with a farm nano that is starting. And that's going to be interesting too. What kind of people are going to support the nano on the farm, and what kind of a draw will it be, and how many other breweries will be willing to support and advise and just collaborate. So good stuff, but very different from my Colorado world.
Well, glad you're getting to explore a little bit, and that farm nano sounds fascinating. What's the name of the brewery?
It's going to be on Red Wagon Farm. So Red Wagon Brewing Company is one of the lines of beer that will be produced there, but Four Paws Brewing Company will also be brewing on that system. So it's Four Paws. The original dream was to do a brewery on the east side. They live in the Chagrin area, and we all grew up on the west side. And one of our friends here on the west side that owns Red Wagon Farm wanted to do a destination event location, and said, you know what, there's manufacturing licenses, so it'd be really super cool to do a small brewery here on the farm, to be able to accommodate and sell our own products to the destination events while they're here. So it's kind of an opportunity for Kelly and Ann to learn about brewing, and if this is what they really want to do with a lower capital investment, and kind of exploratory, how does the business work kind of thing before they launch something bigger on the east side.
No, it sounds like a fantastic opportunity. And Kyle, how about you? You're north of the border up in Toronto.
Yeah.
What's the current state of things, and what's the current state of the craft beer industry, as a whole in your area?
It's a little challenging at the moment. So as of tomorrow, all breweries have to start requiring proof of vaccination before people can enter. That's been a very divisive topic here in Canada, because everyone, more or less, people in Canada understand the need for vaccinations, but then having to prove it seems to be a little bit more frustrating for people. But Toronto is home to about almost 40 breweries, so it's not a small brewery town, and you have a huge range from the nanos to about 6 or 7 production breweries. Like Molson for Ontario is here in Toronto. You have several more regional, Steam Whistle works closely with New Belgium, so all New Belgium products for the Canadian market are brewed here in Toronto. Just things like that, but it's just, I'm also seeing people start to spend more, brewery owners specifically, because we only had indoor dining in Toronto start in July. So we've only had before that, there was no indoor dining, no nothing. So a lot of brewery owners, their revenues were still really hurting because the restaurant and bar industries were shuttered for over a year. So we're starting to see people have a little bit more cash, a little bit more capital. On the flip side, though, I'm starting to see government inspectors go out into the field again. And it was kind of nice not having the province or the feds show up on your doorstep unexpectedly for the last year and a half. But now, for example, one customer of mine, they had the AGCEO show up, which is the Alcohol Gaming Commission of Ontario. So they handle all things alcohol, cannabis, and gambling. So they showed up because a bar was operating without the proper paperwork. So they tracked down all the people that had ever sold to them. So that's getting an audit by the tax man isn't fun. And then another customer of mine had a fire inspection this week. So you're not prepared for it. You could be caught in a pretty vulnerable position. And I've been chatting with people about it. It's okay, guys, we need to figure out how to make sure we don't get hit with a big fine for like whenever these inspections start to come happening again, and a lot of people are like, that's fine, that's future brewery problem. It's like, no, time's up.
No, Kyle, to go back to what you mentioned about breweries required to check for proof of vaccination.
Yeah.
Have you talked to any of the breweries you work with how they plan to handle that?
It's pretty simple. It's basically if you there's no federal card or provincial card. Some provinces have already instituted a similar program before. So you have like a little PDF from the government, like because it was administered by the Ontario Health. So you have basically like, I don't even know if I have it. I have mine somewhere on my desk, but it's basically you have like a little piece of paper, and you can either have that on your phone already, or you can bring a paper copy. So you basically say, yeah, here's my ID to drink, and then here is my proof of vaccination. So it's it's pretty much like when you enter, it's kind of like, can we please see some ID? And that's about the extent of the program. But a bar in London, Ontario summarized it pretty astutely, where it's just like you need ID and to show proof of age to drink legally, you need ID and proof of vaccination to eat legally. And they're just unfortunate. And in my opinion, it could be a good thing, because up until now, the onus has been completely on the small business to enforce all the rules. Where this step, it's a clear separation between, no, this is the province taking on the responsibility now, where unfortunately, like, yeah, if you were a small business owner and someone doesn't have a mask or whatever, and the health board shows up, they don't fine the consumer, they fine the establishment. And so now it's just saying, no, now that this step has been taken, I'm almost relieved a little bit, because it's saying, no, this is no longer the small business's responsibility, it's now a provincial responsibility, which is what should have happened in the first place, in my opinion, because it's not fair to make a small business police health rights. That's just not, like, yeah, they need to have a clean kitchen, they need to make sure that the staff are healthy, but in order to get everyone to go through that and make them the people enforcing these rules, that's kind of unfair.
I think, unfortunately, a lot of the breweries who have to enforce things like this will still have to deal with those uncomfortable customer situations, but at least they have the government on their side with regard to this one. So,
yeah,
hopefully it's showing ID when you show your age and showing it right after that as proof. Seems like a 1-2 process that hopefully will work better than we even expected to.
Yeah, and I was chatting with someone who just came. So it was the CBC, and then the CBAs, so the Canadian Brewing Awards. The Canadian Brewing Awards were just after Denver, and Quebec has had a very similar policy for several months. And they basically said, yeah, you just make sure you have your little PDF on your phone. You show your driver's license, and then you show your phone, and then they let you in. So I think some people might be making a bigger deal than it actually is, but it's what's going to help us get through this unfortunate. They're calling it the fourth wave here in Canada with this Delta variant.
We live in a fun world, don't we?
Yeah.
Everyone today, I kind of love to touch on something that Laura mentioned a couple minutes ago. You were talking about the craft beer scene in Ohio, and it said it's not as collaborative as you experienced at other parts in your career. Do you all feel this is a trend we're going to see more of in the industry, for breweries looking at other breweries as competition, whether for customers, whether for staff? Or do you believe that collaboration aspect is still there, and maybe these instances that Laura mentioned are more the outliers versus the trends that we're seeing? What are everybody's thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the underlining desire and culture to be collaborative is still there, but I think given the pressures that are being put on businesses right now, it's easy for that to slip in a situation like this, where breweries are feeling pressure for staffing, breweries are feeling pressure for the bottom line after lost revenues and sales for a while and trying to recoup that. And so I think inherently that's having the craft industry come to a little bit of a come to reckoning. We didn't really operate as businesses for a long time. And I think, it'll be interesting to see if that bounces back as business bounces back, or if that kind of competitive, we're a business and we need to operate that way kind of continues forward. I think that we'll end up somewhere in the middle, and it'll just be a little bit more choiceful about the collaboration that takes place, and really being, critical about how that's going to help drive your business, which in some ways I think is a good move to help sustain the industry, because I think, as fun as it is to be a very collaborative and friendly industry, there's pressures, not just from within and other craft breweries, but also from other categories that aren't going to be as friendly and cozy and collaborative. So I think, craft breweries will be served well to kind of, get a little bit thicker skin that they've maybe grown through this process, but still have that underlining culture, I think, still there. So hopefully doesn't go too far off the deep end.
And Colleen, you had mentioned that Charlotte may or may not be a saturated market at this point. Are you still seeing collaboration there? Is it more of the competition that Laura mentioned, like locally where you're at?
I would say that it's maybe becoming a little cliquey. So collaboration is getting kind of more isolated into, all right, I'm friends with these breweries, but I'm a little iffy about these breweries. So I think whether that's getting more hyper local within the neighborhood of the city, or it's still a relationship driven business. So the brewer at this brewery is good friends with the brewer at this brewery. They're more likely to do a collaboration brew together. So I think it's getting a little bit more selective and maybe a little cliquey from that lens.
I can absolutely see that. And Laura, from your perspective, do you believe this is a temporary trend caused by the pandemic, or is there less collaboration actually happening in the craft beer industry?
In this case, I don't think it's due to the pandemic at all. I've seen some interesting bubbles over time. I think the first time that I really felt that the rising tide and banding together as small brewers was kind of at risk or was interrupted was with the Ballast Point sale. And all of a sudden you saw a whole bunch of people, especially post 2008, that were really interested in getting into the brewing business as an investment. All of a sudden you had people that were not brewing with their hearts, they were brewing with their wallets. And it was a departure from the people who are doing what they love and are living their dream, which is one of the reasons that I love this industry. The second bump in that was when AB started acquiring breweries, and there was kind of that struggle amongst some of those that chose to sell to AB or have controlling shares purchased by AB to want to still be part of the small craft brewer family, because that's where their heritage and roots are, but all of a sudden having the advantages of being part of a larger organization. And that was a real struggle, especially in Colorado, particularly with Breckenridge, because Todd Ustry has always been such a motivating and passionate person working to further the small brewer. And all of a sudden there was some resentment about, you're not on our team, but I am on your, that kind of thing. And so that was really difficult. And we saw that happen across the country. Wicked Weed caused similar ripples in Asheville, North Carolina. The whole, how do we identify in this case? So that caused a pretty major bump in the road, I think, in some cases. So I find it interesting to see this happen without some external thing. I mean, Platform was acquired by AB, so that's happened in Cleveland too. But this happened, this feeling of what's not collaborative was happening before that. And I believe that if there is if for some reason with this nano, we're able to have little invitationals on the farm and some things like that, I think we could really build a little more of that camaraderie, doing some, collabs that are multiple breweries across the region or something like that. I think there's a way to pull people together, but it's hard to know where the roots of that lie. And it may be especially magnified by the financial strains of the pandemic, to Colleen's point. I'm curious, Kyle, too, to hear more about what support federally your breweries received or didn't, because I think some of ours that did get support are going to hit a crisis point here when some of the loans that are needing to be repaid have to start being repaid. And I wonder if we're going to see some people drop off that otherwise would not have.
Yeah, absolutely, Laura. Kyle, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I'll go with the whole government things. So there were a couple of main programs that the Canadian government offered. One was the Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit, which was a individual relief benefit. So that basically it was like an employment insurance plus policy, so that if you were part-time employed, or you were on maternity leave or something like that, and you tried to go back to work and there was no job for you there, that's kind of what that was for. A lot of entrepreneurs and type people, they basically said, yeah, my business can't afford to pay me right now, so they would offer that program. It was relatively easy to get approved for that program on an individual basis, and that was basically about $2,000 a month Canadian for anyone who needed it. That program was pretty easy to get into. I found any of the and then there was a Canadian emergency wage subsidy, and there were also additional like rent subsidies and like those. I found the corporate benefits were very difficult for a small business to apply for or to establish, especially if you had only been in business a couple of years, because your first 3 to 5 years of operations, you're trying to grow as fast as possible. And there was, like, for example, I applied to as a business owner, I applied to every program I could. And one of the programs I applied to, they were like, okay, you have to send us every purchase order you made over last year. And I'm like, on a web portal, so it wasn't even easy. So I did it, and they literally rejected every single purchase order. They went through it, rejected every single purchase order, and they're like, okay, well, you don't qualify because you didn't have $80,000 of something's of costs last year. I'm like, well, if you reject every single purchase order I ever made, then yes, I'm not going to have $80,000 worth of expenses last year. I know a lot of people that try to get the emergency wage subsidies, and they were disqualified. So the programs were there, but accessing them was very difficult. I don't know how many people actually were able to use them. And it basically, like, even in my instance, they basically said for one program, they only used the month of April, not like a whole year. It's just like April of 2019 versus April of 2020. And they're like, you had to have a reduction of a certain minimum amount. And a lot of people are saying, my April wasn't great, but it wasn't like that reduced. And the government's like, well, you don't apply for that. And I'm like, well, what about March, or what about May? And they're like, nope, only April. And it's like, well, how, like, this doesn't make sense. So yeah, there was support there. I think the biggest help that did help small business workers is a lot of people just said, hey, we'll lay you off. And then that gave them the opportunity to get the emergency wage relief, like the personal benefits, so that the small business could keep their payroll at smallest as possible during the hardest times of lockdowns or something like that. But apart from that, it's hard to measure. And I think everywhere is kind of going through a rehiring issues, and we're seeing calls for increasing minimum wages. We're seeing calls for workers' rights here in Canada. So yeah, I haven't seen any breweries close too much in the Ontario market. I've seen them change hands. So there's been several big brewery sales happen in the last year, but none of the facilities have been gutted and sold for parts, which I was afraid of happening. Yeah, so I haven't seen breweries close, but I haven't seen them thrive either. I had several big expansion contracts lined up about just over a year and a half ago, and I was really looking forward to a lot of them, and they basically just said, no, not doing it. And now I'm telling people, yeah, we need to wait at least 6 months. And they're like, why? And it's like a shipping container cost has gone from about $4,000 American from China to North America. My latest quote was $29,000. And so it's still going to be rough for a little while. And now to loop back to the whole collaboration thing. I don't know if I see a lot of people making collaborative beers at the moment, but we're starting to return to older patterns of spotting ingredients or chemicals or supplies than you would normally. Supply chains are not great at the moment. I remember needing lactic acid, which is a pretty common chemical needed in brewing, and the supplier basically just said, we don't even know if we can get this to you within 4 weeks. And that's kind of par for the course. If you have to mill your own grain at the moment, it's normally about 2 weeks away, and it's very different from the whole. I think a lot of people are too used to Jeffrey Bezos and Amazon being like, oh, I just type this thing into the computer box and it shows up with Prime tomorrow morning. And yeah, no, like it's 4 to 6 weeks now for a lot of the base comic stuff. And I think a lot of businesses are struggling with that because cash flow is tight, so they can't always afford 6 weeks of ingredients. But at the same time, well, if you don't have ingredients, you're not making beer. If you're not making beer, you're not generating revenue. So so you're starting to see a lot more of, hey, my drum of caustic is 2 weeks away. Can you spot me a couple of liters just so I can keep cleaning stuff? And this is a tradition that is well established in brewing. When Labatt donated their brewing logs to my alma mater several years ago, you look at the old records, and London, Ontario was a big brewing town in the 19th century. It's the home of both Labatt's and Carling. And they're in the brew logs in the 19th century. They're like, oh, we borrowed yeast from Carling, or oh, we gave yeast to Carling. So it's not a new thing. It's an old tradition in the industry because you need healthy yeast, you need good quality ingredients, you need cleaning resources. Those haven't changed, but the ability to source them has become very difficult. So that's where you're going to see more collaborative resources, where it's on figuring out how to keep, and everything's gone up in cost. I've been hit with 2 or 3 price increases from some of my suppliers in the last 6 months, and every time it happens, it's like, guys, you just gave me a price increase like a month or 2 ago. They're like, yeah, we know, but we need to do it again because this originally comes from Asia or whatever. So yeah, I don't think you're going to see too many. I think it's more focused on how to keep the businesses running in collaboration instead of what do we do fun things at the moment.
Kyle, you mentioned a lot of great points just now, and kind of looking at it through the pandemic lens, collaboration is relationship based by default. And the fact that we haven't been able to spend a lot of, face-to-face time with people, I think has hurt the collaborative nature of our industry. So hopefully, as the world slowly gets a little less intentional, which sounds funny to say, but everybody has been so intentional with who they interact with, where they go. Yeah. Hopefully, I think go in a better direction, that collaboration kind of increases. And you also mentioned about, costs increasing, delays in shipments. We've seen a lot of posts in craft beer professionals about breweries frustrated with the lack of communication through suppliers and just saying they get a quote for something in 6 weeks and they, 10 weeks later, they still don't have it. For the three of you, what type of additional relationships and communication should industry suppliers be, having with their brewery partners to make sure they're aware of, like we mentioned earlier, resetting these expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I think transparency and honesty are the most critical side of things. I think as a business owner, you're able to react to real information better than, surprises. So even if that information is bad news, like it's going to take 4 weeks for something that used to take a day, or it's going to take 8 months for something that used to take 4 months, you can at least plan accordingly if you have the best information. I would say, when I was still at Craft Brew Alliance, kind of during the pandemic, we were, not immune to the can shortage that everyone was going on. And the peak of it for us was we were supposed to get in a certain month about 30 truckloads of printed cans for all of our, 8 breweries, to one of our largest production facilities. And I think 2 days after that shipment was supposed to arrive, they said, oh, you're actually only going to be able to get 6 truckloads. That is a dramatic reduction. And then we were trying to figure out, we were then dealing with out of stocks for sure. during that time, but we were also trying to figure out how to adjust our production plans and work with them to figure out, all right, is this a 1 month thing, or like what can we expect next month? And it took them a really long time, and they were really non-committal about the number of trucks we were going to be able to get. And they were like, select what your top priority brand is, because when you're doing printed cans, it's not like we can be as flexible on our side to adjust what we're labeling those with, though we were exploring a lot of different options at the time. And it was really tough for us, particularly as a portfolio company, where we were having to decide essentially, like, are we still Craft Brew Alliance, or are we the Kona Brewing Company, right? Because, logic would say, throw all of that resource at your, fastest growing brand or your largest brand that, but then, me running a bunch of East Coast breweries that we had acquired, a year and a half prior, and suddenly having to be like, hey, I don't know if we're going to be able to like put your beer in cans at all, especially when the on-premise wasn't back at all. It was really tough. And then just navigating that. But I would say it was compounded by the fact that the supplier wasn't able to give us accurate, timely information to help us plan or react to. And I know they were feeling pressure as well. And it wasn't like they were completely withholding information. They were trying to do everything on their part to figure it out. But I think just even being real about what you don't know and what a worst case scenario could be would have been more helpful than what we were dealing with. So I think, whether it's component suppliers, ingredient suppliers, you name it, equipment suppliers, I think it's just that transparency. But I think for a lot of those sales people and, customer service reps at those firms, it goes against their nature. Like, they're having to learn to give customers bad news, which like you're almost told never to do in those situations, and to just solve all of that behind the scenes. So I feel some sympathy for them, because they're having to really, shatter a lot of their working norms and kind of how they would approach things. But in general, I think it always comes down to honesty and transparency in my mind, because that's going to make that relationship be able to sustain after these bumps in the road, but also allow the brewers to plan accordingly, even if they're having to plan for some bad news.
I couldn't agree more with all that, Colleen. That was fantastic. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to that? Yeah, you absolutely. Laura, go ahead.
I think the word transparency was immediately what jumped into my head. So I'm totally with you on that. I don't really have more to add except a couple of examples. Leslie from Bootstrap in Niwot, Longmont, was a really good person to frame that in a really nice way, which was they were already in cans. They actually have done well during the pandemic. They were positioned just fortuitously. They were already had some off-premise accounts, already had some distribution lined up, and were canning. But she said the price of cans. And so they had orders in with 5 different can suppliers, and the price was different with every single can supplier. And I think that is a good illustration of somebody reinventing their communication, to your point, Colleen, and saying, hey, we're not going to have everything we'd like to for you, so go look somewhere else also. But also hedging your bets against, where do I get these cans? And then owning the fact that we might be doing really, really well, but our expenses are so far out of whack with this supply chain that we still do need support to be able to purchase enough in advance, far enough to be able to make the beer continue to be packaged and head out. So I think that going forward, we're going to need to, our t-shirts that we got for Start a Brewery weren't delivered to the printer in time to make CBC. It's everywhere. And so I think that we're going to have more money in hand to be able to stretch it out further. It's not going to be as fast a turnaround on that money to recycle the money from A to B as it used to be. So we're going to need to have more in the mix, which is going to be tougher to do. And it's going to come back to the lenders in order for us to be able to navigate that supply chain, even with full transparency and even with everybody working together and pivoting. We're just going to need to have farther order windows and allow for the fact that you're probably not going to get everything, hopefully something, that you ordered.
I believe you're right on that one. And all of you, especially Laura, you're passionate about helping breweries and planning in new businesses. Why is this important to you? Why did you choose, besides the domain was available for startedbrewery.com, why did you want to dedicate so much of your time to helping new entrepreneurs who are launching businesses in craft beer?
There's a couple of reasons that start a brewery is super important. A lot of us who do consulting, whether primarily or as part of what we do, would love to have a more educated client. That was one of the drivers, was how many times do we need to answer this question? Can't we just post it somewhere? So that we can then move on to all of the other customized specialty answers that are more complicated, that are more specific to you and your brewery and your problems or your dreams. Because we're spending an awful lot of time answering basic questions and just bringing that knowledge level up to now we can have this conversation. So that was a driver. I think one that's a little more inspirational than that is the fact that having a free resource also allows dreamers that don't have a brewery around the corner or mentors in the industry or people who look like them in the industry. Those dreamers can have access to and some pointers to where to find, even if it's not located on our site, some of the resources and be able to, again, level up so that they understand what they're asking for and what they need to be able to have a much better opportunity to make their dream happen. So I think that's pretty inspirational, particularly with the reckoning that we've gone through recently or are still going through in terms of trying to be equitable across the board with the industry. Dr. J made some really good points about beer being the engine grease, the fuel, the whatever for social interactions for everyone. And I think that having a free educational resource makes it truly an opportunity for everyone if you can help everybody level up to the point where they know who and where they can go for answers or direction.
And Colleen and Kyle, what are your thoughts on that? What is your main motivation for wanting to work with startup breweries?
Kyle, do you want to go?
I can go first. So my career as a freelance consultant started in not really a small way, because about 3 years ago, I was working at a manufacturer of brewing equipment, and I went in one day on Monday, and there was a letter from the lawyer saying that the company was defunct and that there was no longer legally existed. So I'm like, I guess I don't have a job anymore. But several of my clients basically called me within 24 hours and basically said, well, surprise, surprise, we still want to finish our brewery or expansion. And they did. I'm like, yeah, but I got fired yesterday. I'm not doing this right now. And they're like, yeah, but we don't know anyone else that can fix these problems at the moment. So that's where I started, and that started with someone like Black Lab in Toronto, which they were hurt the most. Escarpment Labs, which is extremely well known across North America and the world for yeast research. They were in the middle of a huge expansion, and they were basically saying, crap, like our tanks are in China, these pumps are somewhere in Wisconsin, these things are here. And they're like, can you just help us sort through it and figure it out and get it all here? Because when you start these projects, you're putting down 25 or 50% typically with a manufacturer, and that money went away. So I started consulting basically just to prevent bankruptcies in my home market in the Canadian craft brewing scene. So, and as I went on, people were like, okay, yeah, you're a skilled enough engineer, that's for sure. But people responded more to my small business advice. There was once or twice where I got called into a board meeting and I'm just like, crap, I'm going to get fired right now. And they're like, so we're having this problem with this partner. What do you think we should do? And I'm like, I'm not a lawyer, guys. So I'm like, okay, go to your lawyer, get this agreement, do this. And they're like, oh, that just saves us, $500 in legal fees. Okay, we'll probably do that then. So, and I just stuck at it. So I've also I was head brewer at a regional brewery before I did equipment. I've been brewing since I was about 18. there's just something about it where it's like you get some incredibly passionate people in the industry, and that's hard to look away. And you get into the industry and you realize it's like, okay, like it's all about building up small communities. And I think as markets tend to get a little bit more saturated, you're not necessarily going to be able to ship to huge distributors and ship across. Like I think the whole business model of, oh, we'll just start a brewery and grow at 5 to 10% a year for 15 years and then we sell to the big guys. I don't think that business model exists anymore. But if you just focus on creating a small community hub and focusing on your local market, and paying attention to the trends within that community, you'll probably be busy. It's just a huge shift from going from the huge manufacturing hubs of, oh, we'll just truck everything in from who knows where and then make it and then truck everything out. It's a huge shift in how food and beverage is being consumed at a local level. I'm in Etobicoke, which is a borough of Toronto, and over the last year and a half, it's a little bit more suburban, a little bit more industrial than most of Toronto, but you see all these restaurant owners who basically said, I can't afford rent downtown Toronto. Like, imagine someone in Manhattan being like, I'm not bringing in diners on tables. So what do? They go to Queens or they go to Brooklyn or something, and they open up a little pasta factory. And I'm seeing a lot of that in the last year and a half, where it's a break in your typical distribution chain where that manufacturer is able to sell directly to the consumer through an online platform or through a delivery service. And a lot of, like, there is someone I know that's exactly what they did. They had a chain of high-end Italian restaurants, and they're like, we're not gambling this, we're closing this down, and we're going to start making pasta in bulk for grocery stores. And so I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing a lot of changes in how we're approaching food and drink, and as a society where you're shifting away from the Wonder Bread and you're going to the local little sourdough baker. So craft beer, I believe, is probably one of the most important cornerstones in that, because you will see a craft brewery will normally be first because they will take over the largest abandoned industrial building that they can get their hands on, because fermenters are not small. And then they will start that chain reaction where you get the craft brewery in place, and then, okay, you get a little cafe or a coffee shop next door, and then you get the restaurant. So it's, to me, that's how you start to rebuild communities in some of these areas, because you just bring in a commodity that everyone wants and you help reinvent the neighborhood. The best example in Toronto I can think of that is a brewery called Left Field. And that name comes up in craft beer professionals somewhat often because they work extensively with Cody marketing. And they took over an abandoned brick factory. And there are a couple of people who are like, we don't want a brewery in our backyard. But most people are like, yeah, but my property values have gone up. My car is no longer being broken into because there's not this huge plot of land just with nobody there. But because the brewery's open until 9 or 10 at night, there's constantly people coming in and out. I don't have to worry about my car windows being smashed. So it's a catalyst for growth. It's a catalyst for communities. In the age of Amazon and Walmart and click delivery, we're shifting away from that in a little bit with craft beer. And I think that's why it's important to keep reinvesting in the industry.
No, absolutely. Colleen, anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think part of it is a little bit something Laura hit on of, realizing some of those fundamentals, the blocking and tackling, the question that every company that you're interacting with asks, and realizing that there was an ability for that I think working for a bigger brewery in Craft Brewer Alliance and then Anheuser-Busch, I think you take for granted how much of a quick impact that can have for some of these smaller startup or independent breweries that are really just trying to get going and figure it out along the way. So, I think the positive side of that, even though it's, can seem like, oh, don't you just wish everyone had that fundamental knowledge? You're able to have an impact with them so quickly by providing that. And then for me, I think it's also the variety and the, it's not a one size fits all approach. For me, I think we had gotten a little bit formulaic, and there was a set playbook or a universal, portfolio strategy that we were trying to drive at CBA or within the Brewers Collective at AB. And I mean, those were sound strategies, and they probably worked really well 8 out of 10 times, but we weren't being as attentive to the 2 out of 10 that we were trying to fit kind of square peg into a round hole. I think they were getting better at that, especially as we were acquiring kind of younger, newer breweries that were, helping to kind of rattle the cages a little bit in a good way. But for me, now consulting with all sorts of independent breweries, startup breweries, you can really tailor and customize kind of what you're working on to their market, to their business model, to their founders, right? Every founder set has different skill sets. They might be home brewers that are now trying to jump into the business and they need a lot of help on the business or legal side of things. They might be, people that have just liked hanging out at craft breweries but have never brewed a drop of beer in their life, and they need a ton of guidance on the other side. So I think it, really allows you to kind of customize to what's going on and tailor that. And for me, that just makes my job more fun and less formulaic.
Yeah, I like being less formulaic. It's a good way to put it, Colleen. And as we kind of wind down the hour, and I appreciate all of your time today, I have one last question I want to throw your way. We've talked about a lot of changes in the industry. We're talking about collaboration versus competition, or the makeup of, the brewery owner these days. Looking at the people opening a brewery, in the current state of the world, what positives are you seeing? Are you seeing that they're, more business focused, which is the positive for the industry, or are there any unique observations you have on how the new wave of brewers is beneficial to craft beer as a whole?
I mean, I can start. I don't think that there's a singular answer or profile of who's starting breweries these days or running breweries these days, but I would say I feel like the ones starting it right now are doing it with a little bit more eyes wide open. I think if you rewind a decade ago, it was just like, still the hot new thing. And it was, hey, if you build it, they will come kind of mentality. I think there's still that passion that's there and excitement behind the industry. But I think, folks have realized a little bit more or heard stories of the pressures of the industry in addition to the benefits of the industry. So I think they might not know all the answers for how to overcome those as they're getting into it, but I think they're more aware that it's not just all, roses on the other side, and that they have to be thinking holistically and be prepared to kind of battle through some of those challenges to get to where they want to be. But Laura, I'm sure, you work specifically with startups, so you might have a different take there.
Yeah, Laura, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Well, start a brewery is less about me being the consultant and more about me being the wrangler of all of the people that specialize. I definitely have an opinion about most of the elements and the pieces and the parts of how it works, but I most often cry mercy and refer you to somebody else. In distribution, though, I'm interested in Kyle's take in particular on the local piece, because distribution, third-party distribution used to be, you made it. When you had a contract with a third-party distributor, that was your success. And as we watched the enormous proliferation of breweries and then the distributor consolidation, that all kind of happened in the beer industry about the same time as the local focus happened everywhere. And so it was really interesting to me to watch brewers actually startups in particular, become more aware of the fact that the recipe for success, that previous notion that was what defined success, was no longer applicable. That you needed to have a business plan that could stand on its own without counting on distribution, and that you would maybe do better with as long as you had like square blocks, like 10 square blocks without competition, and your neighborhood was super community-based and integrated and willing to support you, that might be the best business model. And then the pandemic came through and everything on premise shut down and went sideways. And if you didn't package, you were hosed. watching what was previously my answer to what is feasible now, because you can't get third party or regional or national distribution successfully because everybody's buying local and there's no distributors with room. The notion of a locally based community center, which is the brewery, that kind of went sideways too. So people coming in the industry right now are coming in because they're living their dream. They're not really coming in for a lot of other reasons because the brewing industry just got bitten and all the on-premise closed. So I think it's right now we're back to the dreamers of the 2008 world, that are wide open, to your point, Colleen, and coming in with let's individually look and see how my area could succeed. And there's still plenty of beer deserts, particularly in the South. But there's no like one size fits all right now. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how people find a foothold. I don't think there's a specific recipe for success.
Absolutely. That's fantastic insight, Laura. And Kyle, I'll let you close us out. Final thoughts.
I think brewery owners should be paying a little bit more attention to workers' rights at the moment. So about 6 months ago, you had the whole Brienne from I think she's left Notch now, but you have moments like that. And about a week or so ago, one of the head brewers here in Toronto kind of wrote a piece for a labor magazine, and it basically just said, it's times are up for the brewing industry. You either need to grow and mature, or you're done. Because if you don't have those strong labor practices, your turnaround's going to be over. And unfortunately, a brewer is the lifeblood of a brewery. You can't, if your brewer is leaving every year, you're never going to be able to establish solid brands. You're never going to be able to establish solid manufacturing processes. And a lot of them are just saying, hey, this was fun for the first couple of years of my career. Now it's like, now I have a mortgage, or now I'm trying to live in Toronto, which has one of the highest costs of rent in North America. If people don't respond to that by saying, well, we want to open up a brew pub downtown Toronto, well, then you're going to have to pay your brewer to be able to live in downtown Toronto. And we're past that point where you could, like, when I started in the industry, there was no accreditation. There was no checking. Like, you could literally be a home brewer with a little bit of experience and have a history degree, and they'll be like, okay, well, we'll put you in the brewer house. And now a lot of employers are saying, okay, well, we require a certificate from like UC Davis or from Niagara College or from a brewing institution. Well, those programs cost a lot of money in order to participate in, and then you have a lot of people getting into the industry. So it's almost like, okay, well, before it was kind of coaxing, but now it's like, no, you need to figure out how to make sure that your brewer is not just paid a living wage, they're almost paid a thriving wage. Because if they will, I know that it's like, I will take a lot of shit if I know that I'm not stressed out about money. But if you're stressed out about money, and if you're stressed out about your work environment as well, you're going to be done real quick. And unfortunately, brewers are normally doing a lot more than they were previously, because the brewer is almost the last person to get laid off. So they're normally being tossed into all these situations where, yeah, you're expected to give the tours or do the things that are not in your role, but at the same time, you need to make sure that they're well accounted for. And unfortunately, if people don't start, if they keep thinking that their brewer is someone like a line cook in a small pub, you're not going to be making good beer. You're not going to be making reliable beer. You need to start figuring out how to base your business off of, a minimum of 2 brews in, 2 brews out a week. And if you can't do that and keep your brewer like working steadily and working happy, well, unfortunately, your brewer is going to quit, because there's so many breweries around. It's pretty easy to change jobs all of a sudden. So this isn't a new thing after a pandemic. This is well documented that every time we have a pandemic in human history, wages go up, because a lot of people are like, no, I'm done doing what I was before. So you need to figure out how to pay me in a fair way. And if the average brewery is not willing to do that, well, unfortunately, the average brewery might end up closing.
Kyle, fantastic feedback as always. And I appreciate all of you just hanging out for an hour and sharing all of your insight. I'm dropping a link in the comments right now. Kyle, you mentioned programs like UC Davis and just continued brewery education. They're doing an upcoming webinar I wanted to share with everyone about the value of just extra certification programs. So that's in the comments for anyone interested. But Kyle, Laura, Colleen, I know we could talk for hours about all these conversations, and I appreciate you hanging out for this one. So hope to see you again soon, and everybody have a great day. Talk to you later.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.
Always fun, Andrew. Thank you.